All right. So as you're also going around the room, were there things that you had difficulties finding someone to sign on? Did folks have one? Yes.
A lot of people had, family, friends, those kind of things. When I think of values, I went off on a whole different direction, and so I had intelligence, integrity, common sense, courtesy.
Okay. So
and she gave me family because I would never have thought of that.
Okay.
And that was the only one that got signatures. But I mean, when I think of values, I think of something just totally different.
Okay. Well, let's take your first one, intelligence, right? Please raise your hand if you value intelligence, even if it was not written on your paper. Intelligence is important. Okay? Cool, cool, cool. Thank you. Another one. Does someone else have one? Yes, ma'am.
Kindness.
Kindness. Please raise your hand if you value kindness, even if it wasn't written on your paper. Okay? Cool. One more.
How about myself?
Yourself, right? Please raise your hand if you value yourself, even though it may not have been written on the paper. That's great. That's great. So what do you think what's the moral of this particular activity, or what do you think I was trying to get at in having us do this particular activity?
We all have a lot in common.
We all have a lot in common? Yes, sir?
There's a lot of different things that people value, and most people, it's not that different amongst them.
Yep. Yep. That the things that we value are actually not that much different. One of the things that we find is that the differences that we think we see typically are optical illusions, right? That the methods of how people get to those goals are typically the things that trip us up, right? So, for example, women with hijabs, right? Some folks say, well, that's oppressive. Well, I think women in string bikinis is a little bit oppressive, right? And so why do people do what they do? What typically trips us up is the methods that they take to get to their end goal, all right? And so we'll talk about that as well. So I also wanted to share with you, I don't know if anyone has heard the Lady Gaga song, I Was Born This Way. I was born this way. I think one part she's like humping a camel or something, this is crazy stuff that's happening in some of these videos, right? So in response to that, I did some personal reflection, and I realized that I, in fact, was not born black. I was not born black. My parents knew each other in elementary school, in junior high, and in high school. After they graduated, they messed around for a while, and I'm part of the product of that, which is really interesting because the backdrop of my family is that my dad is a Pentecostal preacher, and so he preached no sex before marriage, no sex before marriage. Right? Because that's the word. Woo! And but we have this little family secret that my parents were married in July, and I was born in October. The math didn't quite work out, right? But one of the things that's really interesting about that is that when my dad put his DNA on the table and my mom put her DNA on the table and they mixed it all together, and at least that's how they told me I got here. Right? So they mixed it all together, I became human. So I'm swimming around, chilling for 9 months, eating as much as I want, just relaxing in the pool. And then all of a sudden, the dreaded day comes. October 30th, 1970. They put my mom up in these mechanical stirrup things. And the doctor's there with his catcher's mitt. And behind the doctor is the lady from the Social Security office. And she has her tablet. And she says, we want to see what he's going to be. We have suspicions that he'll never live old enough to get Social Security, but we'll still put FICA on all of his checks. Then we had the lady from the public schools, and so she had a clipboard. She was like, oh, he's coming from a poor family. So he's automatically going to Head Start. And then the other lady next to her was from the other office, and she said, we can't wait to see what his racial designation is. Black, white, or other. Right? Because those were all the choices that they had back then. And then lastly, there's a guy who's from the correctional facility. He said, well, I hope he can learn by the age of 3. Otherwise, we'll add an extra bed in the penitentiary. Right? So I had all these people standing around in the background waiting to see what would happen. And so then, at 7:59, boop, I'm here! And they all checked their clipboards and walked away. Before I was black, I was human. And when I was born, there were people waiting to try to determine what my destiny is, to tell me what kind of life I will have, be, and the kind of personality that I should have. And I like to offer to you that the same thing happened to you. That when you were gestating in your mother's womb, you were human. And then society put these things on you to make you white, German, Croatian, Isantian. Right? So it's the social construct that has created us to be the categories that we are. Now, what's exciting about the social construct making us who we are? What is a social construct? Who makes social constructs? Society. And society is made up of whom? Us. People. It's funny. I was talking with a kid about the Fighting Sioux. Right? And they want to change the name. And he was like, well, I don't think that, we've had that name and there's some pride associated with it. And I'm down, whatever. But what did the Sioux people say? I think you should be able to determine what you want to be called. Black people were Negroes, they were black, and then they were African American, and now I guess we're African American black, but they get to decide who they want to be. Just like we get to decide what kind of world we want to have. Stop buying Coke. What's going to happen to Coke? They won't exist or they'll change. Right? Who bought the new Coke? That stuff was nasty compared to the old Coke. Right? So we can change things. We can make things different. We can make them better. It is in our hands. It's not outside of us. So, I got to get moving. Oh, so I did want to talk about this, though, just for a minute. Because there's this thing that's running rampant in society at large that is talking about the intelligence of groups. And so there's this study that says that intelligence is on this bell curve throughout the planet. And I always find it interesting that the people who do the studies, their group is always on top. Their group is never on the bottom for anything, right? But so they're talking about this intelligence. And they're talking about, in this part of the world, they're intelligent in this way. In this part, they're not as intelligent and all sorts of stuff. And I started asking myself, intelligence for what? Example. How many people grew up on a farm or around farms or know something about a farm? Please raise your hand. Is there a certain kind of intelligence that one has to have to be on a farm? So what kinds of things do you have to know to be on a farm?
Fix everything.
Had to fix everything, right? Because you just can't go to, AutoZone or whatever and just grab a part or call somebody up. You got to be there to make it happen yourself. What else do you have to know?
How to take care of animals.
How to take care of animals, right? How to, do all the stuff and pull them out and fix them and, all the stuff that you do to prepare animals, right? Now, what would happen if I took a person from, let's say, a farm in greater Minnesota, and I dropped them in downtown Manhattan? What would the people in Manhattan say about this farmer?
Unintelligent.
That he's unintelligent. What else?
Yeah.
That he's a hick.
Out of place.
That he's out of place. That's what they might say about it. They might even conclude that he is low in intelligence. But what would happen if I took a person from Manhattan and placed them on a farm in greater Minnesota? He'd be sent home if he's lucky. Because what do you do with a dog that doesn't hunt? Right? So when we talk about this thing about intelligence, and we talk about, well, what do these people want, or why can't they understand, our customs and all that kind of stuff, typically they're out of place. Can the farmer figure out how to operate in Manhattan?
Yes.
Yes, he can. Is he going to do it in a day?
No.
Probably not. Can the person from Manhattan figure out how to operate on that farm?
Yes.
Is it going to happen in a day? No, but it needs to happen sooner because they're no good. Right? So when we talk about, why are people moving, blah, 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 what people need is somewhat. Starts with T and ends in I'm. They need some time. Right? We need to give folks time. All right. So, just a little bit about my approach, and then we'll get into the meat of our time together. One part of my approach is I believe that people can learn, change, and grow. Who I am today is not who I was at 17. Thank God. All human behavior is goal-directed, which means that people do stuff because they expect some kind of outcome. Right? One of the most frustrating things for adults is when we interact with a kid and we say, Jeffrey, don't do that. And then Jeffrey does it, and then we get silly. The adult gets silly, and we say, Jeffrey, why did you do that? And what's Jeffrey's response?
I wanted to.
Because I wanted to. No, his response is, I don't know. But we know the real answer is because he really wanted to. All right? People do what makes sense to them, even if it doesn't make sense to whom? To us, to everybody else. So it making sense to us is not a precursor to them making a decision. All right? And lastly, attitude is a response to a goal. How many people have been accused of having an attitude? Right? Yeah. My parents would do that all the time. And they would say crazy stuff. They'd say like, boy, fix your face. Or they'd say, go to your room till you learn how to act. So I'd be in my room for a while, and then I'd step out into the hallway. To be or not to be? I spend a lot of time in my room. Right? Because that's not what they were talking about. What they were talking about is that there was something that I needed to change, but they weren't articulated enough, and I wasn't intuitive enough to really figure out what that thing was. And then one day it hit me. So my dad is my pastor, and so we would go to church on Sunday from 7:30 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. We stop at 3 o'clock for chicken, not because we're black, but because chicken is delicious. All right? So church all day on Sunday. So Friday night, I asked my dad for the car, and because my dad loves me, what does he say? No, he says, yes, he loves me. Right? So he tosses me the keys. I get the keys. I'm kicking it with my friends, and so we're having fun and whatnot, and I put gas in the car. I come home before curfew. I toss my dad the keys, and he says, I have what kind of an attitude?
Bad.
I have a good attitude, right? I was kicking it. I had fun. I came in before curfew, cars full of gas. I have a good attitude. And I said, my dad has what kind of an attitude? A trusting or a good attitude. Right? So he has a good attitude. I have a good attitude. Sunday, my best friend Dexter calls me at noon and says, Andre, can you pick me up for the movies? What do I know about Sunday? Church all day. But Jesus is my friend. If you call on him, he'll answer prayers. So I go up to my dad and I say, Dad, can I borrow the car? And what does my dad say? No. Not only does he say no, but he gives me a lecture about how I'm leading people to hell. Right? Every negative consequence in my family, the